Dear church, let's talk about living in harmony. Dear church, let's talk Holy Spirit, transformation, prayer.
6 days, right?
And if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Our culture wants to define you by your sexuality. We know that our identity is now Christ.
Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Special guest today, they're all special. But Zane is a special friend, West Texas guy. Used to live closer to you than I do now, but thank goodness for technology. I can have Zane on the podcast today to talk about an important subject. Zane, thanks for joining us, man.
It's good to be here. I've never really paid any attention to your podcast, but I'm glad to be on it.
Yeah, well, you will be famous now. You'll be an overnight sensation. Won't be able to walk down the street in Lubbock. Everybody will know you. I wish that were true, but that's not going to be the case. Sorry. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule, though, to join us. You know, you've been doing a lot of great work since leaving the mission field. But one of the things that I've noticed is you're doing some seminars now. I think they're entitled Living in Harmony. But I really am just hung up on this topic of unity. And I've been sticking with it for the last year or so, doing sermons about it. Even our theme next year at Walnut Street is going to be focused on unity. And I know that your seminars have to do with that. Talk a little bit about kind of, what started this. Talk about, what the seminar is about, and then we'll dig deeper into it, okay?
Well, I've got to give credit where credit is due. This material is not really my material. It's one that I learned back in about 2007, 2008 in a leadership course with my master's degree. And
Okay.
Dr. Sumner presented this material to us in a setting of leadership and how to work better with leaders. Well, on the mission field, you take anything you can get and you can turn it into good material for young Christians. And so we began to use it, began to develop it with helping young Christians learn to live with people who had a different viewpoint.
Right.
And how do we learn to work together? And so it's over that development. It's called Leadership Above the Line. It's what her initial model was, but we've developed it into being a more living in harmony. And we take it and we work with couples. We work in marriages. I've used it in different settings with leadership, because one of the things that we were challenged to see is conflict and issues with disunity. A lot of times are based on perspective, based on what we believe, what we are looking for. And so if we can kind of give people some ideas on some of those things, then it helps alleviate some of that conflict.
Yeah, and I really like it. Of course, I'm looking at the material and I'm applying it to church work. But like you said, it's really universal. The model is something that you can use in daily life, in marriage, and any kind of relationship where there's conflict. Talk a little bit about, you said it's an adaptation of the people model. Yeah. And talk a little bit about that and about how you applied it in the mission field and, kind of the outgrowth from there.
Okay. Well, when we started, the people model is basically the model developed in the book Leadership Above the Line by Dr. Sumner.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's an interaction, a profile interaction between three different types of people and of what they feel is important. Looking at it from a business perspective, we applied it to our mission team. But what really made the difference in our lives is when my wife and I applied it to our marriage, because we had fought over the same issues for 10 years. And it wasn't until going through the model and seeing the different personality profiles in it that we realized, wait a minute, we're just looking at it from a different perspective. Yeah. And so we really were trying to achieve good qualities, because the model is based on we've all been given a number of different categories, but the qualities above the line that we have are God-given, even though one of us may be looking for truth or integrity, the other one's looking for compassion and service, and the third one is looking for impactfulness and a good dynamic between the group. And so what I would perceive in our marriage initially is where the change came. I would perceive her searching for truth as an attack upon me.
Right.
But it was really trying to achieve the same purpose of having a great relationship. And so when we learned to do that, then we saw the potential of it working with young adults, in college. We had a group from Lipscomb University come down and study with us in a study abroad. And about the 3-week mark, in a different culture, in a different setting, roommates began to have issues and they began to have certain challenges. And when I began to show them this model, it really alleviated those challenges in their relationships. And so it helped them work as a unit in their dorm or in their apartment as part of that searching for the thing, but we look at it differently. So it just kind of developed from there. And then moving back to the States, it's one of those things that we just try to keep going in and bringing it into the role with elders. I worked with it recently just with a group of board of directors for the Texas Normal Singing School. It just brings a different dynamic because I don't have to be threatened by you because you look at it differently.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, you mentioned this a couple of times already. If you don't mind digging a little deeper to the above the line and below the line concept.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about those two things and what we're looking at there.
Okay, so the above the line, below the line category, or the concept, is that God gives us all these different gifts, and He gives us these different perspectives, and He gives us different ways to deal with conflict. Well, I'll mention those in a little more detail in a minute. But when we use those in a positive direction, or in a God-given gift, in the way they're supposed to be used, they're good, and so they're not sinful. They're striving for Christ likeness. But when those things that are naturally given to us become self-serving, they go below that line and become self-protecting, and they become sinful. And so you have a characteristic, for instance, and I'll just use an instance, in what the one category that Dr. Sumner subscribes to is she calls him a strategist, which is not a strategic thinker, but someone who thinks in black and white.
Okay.
Above the line, they're pursuing truth. Below the line, they become self-justifying in knowing that they have truth, and they quit looking for truth. And so see how that action works in that way. And when we deal with people who are struggling to strive for truth, if they're being honest and looking to divide and figure out what the issue is, that's okay. But when they go below the line and they're self-protecting because they have all knowledge and they're impatient, then it becomes a sinful act. So the same kind of action, depending on what it's focused on. And the other categories are the same way. The second category is a humanitarian. So a humanitarian, by nature, above the line, is a person who is very compassionate, looking for compassion, looking for service, looking to support one another. Well, when they go below the line, that characteristic that was a godly characteristic below the line becomes self-serving. It becomes a way of making people feel guilty about how much I'm having to do. And so they're not serving because they're wanting to serve, but they're serving to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And so the third category, just in brief, the third category is the diplomat, which is about unity and impact and creating this harmony, which are good qualities. But if you go below the line in those same qualities, it's about self-protection and manipulation. And so you begin to move the pieces so that no one dislikes you, but dislikes everybody else. And so you have these characteristics. And so I believe what God calls us to do in this process is to try to live above the line in all three. Try to live in above the line in being godly in all those. Now, there's a tendency that one will be our dominant, usually, especially when we go below the line. So when we go below the line and become self-protecting, we're either going to be critical and harsh and struggle with our pride. We're going to be self-protecting and struggle with fear and not being able to say no to anyone, or we're going to be manipulative and create that image that I can't do anything wrong. And so it's a advantage to us to be able to do and live above all three. And I think we do fluctuate between those. And I believe spiritual growth, we end up being all three of those in all different categories.
Yeah, and as I hear you talk, I can picture, some of these personalities. I mean, I can picture myself, but I can picture some elders that I've worked with these personalities in a good light. But it would seem to me that it would be good to have all those different types of personalities in the room, as long as you stay above the line, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because one of the challenges we have in that process is Christ did all three of them. If you look at Christ, when he had to deal with certain aspects of dealing with, for instance, when Peter says, no, you're not going to have to suffer, and he has to confront very directly to Peter in that process, he has to do that from that perspective. But when he's dealing with a woman caught in adultery, he has to do it from a very different perspective, because he dealt with the Pharisees by writing in the sand, and he dealt with her by not condemning her and asking her to go do other things. And so then he also did that with as a diplomat in this making this impact. When John asked, or when the Pharisees come and they ask him, so is the baptism of John, or where do you get your power, or where do you get your authority? And he says, well, you tell me, is John's baptism from God or from man? And so he does that in a totally different strategy. And so he did all three of those because he was dealing with different people in those different aspects.
It's very similar to what I used to say in coaching, is we treat them all fairly, but you don't treat them all equally.
Exactly.
Meaning that there are certain kids that, I could get in their face and I could, just ream them for something and they responded better. Some of them, they would crumble and, it just ruined their life, so you got to be careful on how you handle each individual. When you're coming in, maybe you've been asked to consult, or let's not talk about the seminar necessarily. Let's talk about that you've been consulted. They want you to come in and maybe fix a problem, okay? That they're having disharmony and disunity. What do you look for first? What's the first thing that you try to notice? Like in the relationship, what dynamic are you trying to single out?
A lot of that comes from what I try to do is I try to figure out the approaches they're having to their conflict.
Okay.
Because one of the things that the model does explain is that the way we deal with conflict comes from our pursuit of what we value to be the most important.
Yeah.
And that becoming, for instance, if you have a lot of people, and this is just something naturally that after using it for so long becomes part of, I can pretty quickly, talking to some people about 10 or 15 minutes, pretty accurately figure out where they're coming from. Just because at the beginning, that when somebody comes and sits at your desk, you kind of know where they're coming from after they've opened their mouth for a few minutes.
Yeah.
But if they're coming from a perspective of the validity of the relationship, and they have to deal with the conflict before they can move on in the relationship, then they're approaching it from the strategist point of view, and they cannot let go of that conflict because that conflict directly affects their identity and what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Now, a humanitarian, as they deal with that process, they're going to enter conflict more on this idea of, can I really say what I believe, or can I not say what I believe? And so there's more fear in their relationship. But the challenge is for a humanitarian in dealing with those conflicts, how long has this process been taking place? Because a strategist deals with an issue immediately. A humanitarian deals with an issue that's been forbearing over time.
Yeah. Because
the strategist believes the inauthenticity of conflict can't grow. Well, the humanitarian says, if you attack me on the first one, I can't, you don't love me enough. And the diplomat's a little bit different in that too, but he looks for a different aspect of how conflict and when conflict is taking place. So he's going to want to, the diplomat's going to want to know that if I'm entering, if they jump me in a meeting, it's never going to go well for a diplomat.
Right.
Because he's going to be taken off guard by that. And so you can pretty much listen to a few people of how they're confronting, because a strategist is going to front, well, he did this wrong, and he did this wrong, and he did this wrong. This is what needs to be done. Well, the humanitarian is going to be talking about, well, that just not everybody feels the same way about that. Yeah. And so you begin to pick up on those terms that they use, which allows you to see where they're coming from so that you can help them get to the root of what the issue is.
Now you're speaking a language that I'm very familiar with, because in counseling, you're talking to people, maybe couples, and one of them is idling at a 7. Right? They're just waiting to hit 10, and they're already at a 7. And we talk a lot about verbal diplomacy. We talk about fair fighting, if you will. Not that, we want to encourage fighting, but how do we communicate? Because if you look at the stressors in a marriage, one of the top ones is communication. Money is another one, but those are the top two. And depending on how you want to order them, but communication is key. And so many don't know how to communicate. And you see it in other relationships, as you know, with elderships or whatever. There's this volatility that they can't seem to work past because everybody's just waiting to pounce, right? They're waiting to jump.
Right.
So you come in and you've got a very difficult situation. I mean, everybody's high octane, their tempers are flaring, steam's coming out of their nose and ears, and you've identified who falls into what category. Now, where are you taking the conversation or the strategy to help these folks come to a better place? Because I think one thing we know, you get more than 2 or 3 people in a room, we're not going to agree on everything.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's where I find that really the beauty of the model comes into play, is because typically what happens when we get into conflict, and this is very symbolic, and it can be in a marriage, it can be in a board meeting, it can be in a elders meeting, or it can be among staff, is typically what happens is one person will go below that line in their category. Yeah. And they'll be down there in the basement just making everybody else's life miserable. Well, what we tend to do is we tend to, and I don't think we do it intentionally, but we go below the line ourselves in our category, and we try to duke it out below the line.
Yeah.
With the impression being, well, if you'll go up and do what's right, then I'll do what's right. Now, I don't think we consciously say that, but that's the way we work. And so when my wife and I would have conflict in our marriage, she would be as a strategist below the line, and I'm a diplomat below the line, and neither one of us are getting any resolve on the issue. Yeah. So what we can do is, if we'll learn how other people are, and this is what I do when there is a conflict, if I can learn how the other people look at things or what profile they are, I move over into their category above the line and try to bring them up instead of try to push them up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so if we're dealing in an eldership group, and we're all dealing with for the most part, we're dealing with an issue that needs this discernment, and we're creating this conflict. If I'm dealing with a humanitarian that's in that mix, and we have them not all of our elders and not all of our deacons are just one category. They're a mixture. Right. So as working with a strategist, you work very differently, and you speak to the point, you speak to the event, the action. And one thing that's really interesting about a strategist, if there's no solution, there's no resolve to fix it. And so he's done. So in the group, as you're dealing with those conflicts, when I talk to a strategist, I'm talking using his vernacular.
Yeah.
But then I would to someone else who is a humanitarian or a diplomat, and I'm going to try to use their vernacular, because that helps them come above the line.
Yeah.
And so how you deal with that is very different. To give you an example, if you're dealing with someone caught in a sinful state, go back and look at how Nathan addressed David in his sin. The prophet Nathan was probably not the first person to talk to David about his sin. Yeah. We know that. I mean, Bathsheba probably did that. Right. The other leaders in the temple, his wise men, probably had all said, David, you're wrong, and you're not doing this. And they gave him this whole description of what he was doing wrong. Yeah. Did he hear them? Absolutely not. But when Nathan comes to him, because I believe, as you can see through Scripture, and part of this model with Dr. Sumner, she pulled it out of the biblical characters.
Yeah.
So you see in David more of a diplomatic kind of person. He's a schmoozer. He kind of goes around. He does good things, but he's also very impactful, and he's very charismatic kind of guy.
Yeah.
Well, when Nathan comes to confront him, he tells him a story. And he tells him the story. And then when David's bought into the judgment on the person in the story, it's when Nathan says, well, David, that's really you.
Yeah.
Which is very different in his confronting him in that way as confronting a diplomat as you would confront when Paul confronts Peter about his hypocrisy in Galatians chapter 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we do is what I learned to do in that process is I have to learn in the process of dealing with conflict is to figure out who's having the conflict and how can I address their conflict from their vernacular, not from my own.
I like it.
I move across and I have to be very strategist in nature when I'm dealing with a strategist below the line.
Yeah.
The problem is that doesn't fit me and my personality because I'm more diplomatic.
Yep.
And so we have to almost step out of ourselves and do it the way they need to. And when we do the seminar, there's a whole bunch of solutions that help them work through that and work in those aspects. So basically you step out of your comfort zone and you try to be like someone else in their above the line characteristics, because if you go below the line, it's not going to work. But if you're above the line, then you can almost throw them the rescue rope down and they can come up.
Makes sense. Yeah. I like how you put that. I have noticed in my experience that most church splits have occurred over personality, pride, politics, the 3 Ps. And every time they say it's over doctrine, right? But seldom is it over doctrine. It's over one of those or all of those 3 Ps. So what I hear you saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, is an adage that we all need to internalize, and we'd be much better off in life and in the church, is it's not about you, right? This is not about you. And I think that's what
the seminar.
Yeah, I think that's what Paul was driving at in his letters as he focused on unity, is that, like Romans 14 keeps coming to mind when I hear you talk. And, I think the gist of that, Paul is saying somebody doesn't have to be wrong here. Quit trying to be the only one in the room that knows what's going on, or the only one that's right, and set yourself aside because it's not about you. I think typically we want to believe that our position is the best position, and if everybody would do it like we did, then we wouldn't have these problems. But we soon realize that not everybody thinks like we do, right?
Well, and that's true, because if we boil it down to a strategist approach to this, it's black and white.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with people, you can't be black and white.
True.
I mean, there are times in our ministry, and you'll know this too. There are times in your ministry when you're dealing with young Christians who are trying to leave their addictions and their difficulties, you have to be more black and white.
Yeah.
But when they're suffering and they're dealing with challenges that are beyond those black and white issues, you've got to be more diplomatic, or you've got to be more humanitarian in that. And so the strength of the whole model and this whole living in harmony is learning who you are.
Yeah.
And learning who other people are, and realize my way is not necessarily the best way to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then learning that just because someone does it different doesn't mean that it's what I believe they're doing in that process. Let me give you just a quick example. This is one of the examples we use in the seminar all the time. Is when I first started my graduate program, I would ask my wife, who's a strategist, to read my you'd start writing a paper and you start getting into it. I would say, would you read this and tell me what you think? Well, in my mind, as a diplomat, I'm looking for her to tell me, is the flow kind of good? Am I headed in the right direction? My wife, being a strategist, would take out a red pen and destroy my paper because she could not do what I asked her to do without correcting the grammar.
Yep.
And so initially I would be like, destroy that. She's destroying me because all she wants to do is write these red ink marks. Well, that's not what she was doing. She was going to do what I needed to do, but she had to fix something first. Well, when we don't understand that, once you learn that about somebody else, then you have the freedom to say, wait a minute, that's a God-given gift they have. Let them work through that. And how can I work alongside of that? What's our purpose?
Yeah, I like that. Great example, by the way, because I've known of couples that would give a similar example, when it comes to things like that. And we are very different people, men and women. So I can see how this seminar would be vital in helping with marriage conflict, among other kind of conflicts. Zane, when we talk about harmony and we talk about unity, I've said this before, but in the church especially, we seem to divide over everything. I mean, if you don't agree with me on every single point, then we can't be in fellowship with one another. And it seems like the rules go like this. Whoever is the most narrow among us are the ones who get to determine unity, which is completely unfair, right? But that tends to be how we operate.
Yeah.
And I see it on social media all the time. I'll give you an example. Not long ago, I heard somebody saying, we don't have any good VBS material for Churches of Christ. We always have to do some prepackaged deal from somewhere else, and we don't have our own stuff. I wish somebody would write the material, that we could use. And I said, you know why we don't have that? And they said, why? And I said, because it would get ripped apart by, all the other Christians, on social media and everything else. Don't use this material because of this or because of that, because that's what we do. We just pick each other apart constantly. We eat ourselves, and it's sad to see, but I think it's a very real thing. So when it comes to unity, Jesus prayed for it. We talk about dividing over doctrine. Well, unity is a doctrine, and we'd better push hard for it because Paul did, Jesus did. So all that is a lot to throw on you. But as we wrap up this conversation, what kind of insight do you have to help work through some of that so that we can be on the same page and not just devouring one another?
That's a big question.
It is. I'm sorry.
As I think about what you're saying in that, I think to me, unity is not, how would I word this? Unity is not a constant thing that never changes.
Okay.
That's why I like to look at this as living in harmony, because in unity, sometimes when we think, and I think sometimes when I think of unity, we also think of uniformity, which is not necessarily the case. But
Agreed.
This concept of living in harmony is unity becomes part of the objective, but it doesn't mean that you have to think like I do.
Yeah.
It means that we learn through this process, how do we take advantage of the God-given things that we have, that some may be better than others, and you may have a better insight on some things that I don't. And so unity becomes, how do we learn to use those things and live in that harmony with one another through that process? Because that gives us the ability to validate one another where we're coming from. And it also gives us the ability to not be threatened by someone's stance on something. Now, there are things out there that are doctrinal issues, like the saving nature of Jesus and his sacrifice. I'm not going to budge on that. But some things out there are things out there that I make a big deal over because that's the way I feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And so living in harmony is, how do I adjust to that? Because am I trying to live in just so that you are like me, or am I trying to learn to live with you even though you may be different? And so that's where these different perspectives can come from, is that my perspective of you may seem to me as a threat, or it may seem to me as weak, or it may seem to me as manipulated, but it really may not be if I'm doing it from a positive direction of where God wants me to be. And so getting to the essence of that is learning to be about, how do we figure this out about living together in harmony instead of being right or wrong?
No, I love the way you put that. I laid a lot on you there, and you handled that very well, because I do feel like this is such a pressing problem. And I think, my opinion, it would be made easier if we would all just kind of step outside of ourselves, like you mentioned early on, and just say, there is at least a possibility I could be wrong, right? I mean, and if I'm not wrong, I could at least be approaching the right thing in the wrong way. And just being humble, I think we've made it our mission in Churches of Christ to know it all. You got to know all this, and you've got to know it, and you've got to have it T's crossed, I's dotted. And I don't think God expects you to know it all. Just be humble and maybe leave the possibility open that you could be wrong. I mean, if you're going to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, I think that's the way we need to approach this.
Yeah.
right?
One of the things that I did when we were on the mission field, especially, and even now, when my kids will ask, or I go to a church and they ask about some issue that the church is facing,
Yeah.
my first response is always, well, at least where I am in my study at this point, it's this.
Yep.
That may change.
Yeah.
That may change in the future. And, the way I look at certain things today may be different than the way I looked at them 10 or 15 years ago. But where I'm now, and if we can be honest enough with each other and say, I'm in this process of growth with you in this unity idea, but I'm not there yet.
Right.
Or I may be further along than you, or I may not be. And even looking at, different things. And so you learn to look behind what people are doing and be humble enough, like you said, to be humble enough to say, this is just where I am. Now, I'm not going to maybe agree with you yet, but at least I'm in that process of being available to sit down and talk about it. And that's where I think a lot of our disunity is coming from. It's because we draw that line in the sand and we're not able to share and look at it from somebody else's perspective. I may be looking at it from the total opposite and seeing a totally different picture, but it's still the same reality we're looking at.
Yeah.
Looking at perspectives.
Totally agree. I mean, I say it all the time. I reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah.
And because I'm approaching this from a scriptural perspective, I am praying for wisdom from God. And if I'm doing that, I'm coming from the right angle, just as somebody else might be who says, well, you don't agree with me, therefore you are a false prophet or a false teacher. Or that's what we want to do. We want to immediately jump to labeling. If you don't agree with me, you're a false teacher, or you don't care about the truth, you're not sincere, you don't love God. I mean, it just becomes ridiculous. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I have the same approach to this as you do. So, I mean, we're both coming at this from the exact right angle and trying to study and figure it out and pray to God for wisdom and discernment. So let's start there.
Yeah.
And see where we can get to. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Start in that commonality of a point and see, which is what we are looking for in life. I understand there are certain people who they need to know right and wrong. They need to know black and white. But another person from a compassion point of view needs to make sure that people feel included. And so does right or wrong triumph over compassion and inclusion? Not necessarily. Right. Either way. I mean, you could be more about the including people and lose truth. And so you have to figure out in that process, how does that look? Or you could be about being this impactful community that throws doctrine out the window. And we don't want to do that either. No. And so it's all about how do we shift and back and forth in this process and be about being people who I give you because you are God's given child, just like I am. How do we get there? And that's going to require of all of us, well, I might be wrong, but I might be right. And I'm not going to assume the worst from you because you disagree. And that's where leading above the line has helped us, because I had to assume that about my wife. You're not being mean to me because you correct my papers, your grammar. You're just doing what you need to do. Well, gives me the ability to understand. So that's where I think it all comes into play, is learning to live in harmony. And that passage that we usually base it out of, Romans 12, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Let God be the one who brings about vengeance. When they are mean to you, be nice to them. That whole concept is so much ingrained in what God calls us to be, that how do we learn to do that together is so key.
Love it. Thank you so much, Zane, for this conversation. Hey, before we let you go, though, tell our audience how they can get in touch with you about doing one of these seminars, or if they have questions, all those kind of things.
I work for Sunset International Bible Institute, but I travel. You can reach me at zane@bible.com. Sorry, take that back. Zane. Can't even remember my own email address. Zane@bible.sunset. You can call me. I can give you my cell phone number. You can 325-206-2599. We are here to serve. And if this is something you want, call me up. We can get you on the schedule. We'll put you on the schedule. We go when we travel and do this for free, just because we know the brotherhood needs to learn to live in harmony.
Yeah. And I appreciate you doing it.
That's for marriages. That's for young adults. That's for elderships. That's whatever you need it. We can adjust that to fit the situation you need us to come help you do.
And, we've talked about conflict resolution on this, this entire podcast, but what you're doing is trying to be proactive and trying to hit it before it becomes reactive. And I appreciate that too. And so thank you, Zane, for being on today. And
Anybody.
want to thank
Whatever we
want
can
to
do.
thank.
Or you can call Chris and have him give you my number.
That's exactly right. You can do that as well. I want to let everybody know if you have a question about today's episode, you can also email me, and I have so many emails, I can't remember mine either, but I think it's chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. And if you have a specific question for Zane, I know he gave his email, but we can forward it on to him as well. I'm sure he'd be willing to answer any question you might have. We just thank you so much for tuning in. Zane, thank you again.
All right. God bless you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.